Welcome to Break the Rules with Dr. Lauren Lax, a podcast dedicated to quieting the noise in the health, food, and fitness world. Dr. Lauren is a leading nutritionist, therapist, and functional medicine practitioner on a mission to help others thrive in their own lives, mind, body, and soul. And now, your host, Dr. Lauren Lax.
Well, hello. Welcome to another edition of the Break the Rules podcast, where we talk about quieting the noise in the health, food, and fitness world. And today, I'm super honored to have Shawndi Borup in the house of Show Me Healthy Living. So if you can't guess what she's all about, it is all about healthy living. And Shawndi is a healthy living coach, certified fermentationist, a woman after my own heart there, and a real food chef, who is all about just being living proof that implementing a simple, healthy lifestyle and healthy habits really promotes optimal health and well-being, and just really making that easy and accessible to many folks who may feel even just overwhelmed about getting into the kitchen. And so, Shawndi, thanks so much for coming on to the show today. If you could give us a little bit of background about who you are and what got you into doing the work you're doing in the world.
Thanks, Lauren. It's a pleasure to be here. Such an honor to be part of your podcast. And I love, what you do, what this podcast is all about breaking the rules. And we'll get into that and how that applies to what I can help your audience to really implement, especially in this time. But my backstory, it starts about 3 decades ago, and it was I had 3 young children, and they all had their own little chronic issues. But my oldest daughter was the most ill with severe asthma, and so I was sitting in the rocking chair, giving her another breathing treatment in the middle of the night, and the thought came to me: there has to be a better way. And that thought just kept cycling through my mind, even though I was doing everything that I possibly knew how to do, what to do. And so I was determined that night to find a better way. And so I ended up going to see a holistic practitioner, and he gave me one sheet of paper. And on that one sheet of paper was a list of foods that really nourish and feed the body. And I took that home, and I'm a really competitive person, and I decided, okay, I'm going to do this for 1 year, and I'm going to prove that food couldn't possibly make that much of a difference in the life and the health of my family. And I was dealing with my own chronic issues at the time. I had chronic tendonitis, and it was really hard to put shoes and socks on my children. And I couldn't go bowling or, do cartwheels in the yard with them or anything either, because I was in so much pain, and I kind of ignored it. I was just in my late 20s at the time, and I thought, oh, this just, is not really happening. And I remember going to the doctor for my wrists, and he handed me a prescription, and he said, you've just got tendonitis. And I said, great. How long do I have to take this? It was an anti-inflammatory. And he said, for the rest of your life. And that, of course, didn't sit well with me. And I had a couple of those experiences. My daughter would seem to get worse with her asthma and allergies when I gave her cow's milk. And so I asked the pediatrician, do you think it would help if I took her off of this? And she said, it won't make any difference at all. And, that's, again, when my mother's intuition, that gut feeling set into me like, okay, you need to try this anyways. And so that's what I did. Is I just started, I took the information from this holistic practitioner that really focused on the whole body, and not just symptoms, but really building a strong immune system really was all what this was all about. And I remember sitting on my couch doing my weekly menu. I had my dry erase board on my lap, and I looked at the one sheet of paper and everything that he suggested eating. And then on the other side of the couch, I had all my recipes, the things that I knew how to do, and nothing matched up. And he was a proponent of eating a lot of raw food, at least half of your plates, because it's the enzymes in raw food that help digest your cooked food. And, concepts that were totally foreign to me, 180 degrees away from the standard American diet, which I had grown up on and knew. And so I just started getting back in the kitchen. That's where I started. And I started, eliminating refined sugar, refined flour, which of course, as we, it's more talked about today, it drives blood sugar in the body, which drives cravings, which drives inflammation, which drives chronic illness. And so I just started, doing one thing at a time. And one thing I learned about helping people get back in the kitchen is that if you try to do everything at once, you're just going to get overwhelmed. And that's when we feel stuck and we stop. And so I really emphasize with people that, we know that we should be eating, more vegetables. We know that we should be eating less sugar, but how do we make that happen? How do we apply that in our eating today? So that's where Show Me Healthy Living came about, because I wanted to help people to really practice how to feel their best.
So that's amazing. I think experience is always the best teacher and the mother of all innovation. And so how long have you been at this, and how long did it even take you to kind of get into that seat of showing people healthy eating from like learning healthy eating?
Right. So I've been teaching people for, I would say 15 years now, probably half of the amount of time that I've been doing it. But, I started this journey, like I said, about 3 decades ago. And I told you that I was going to do that experiment for 1 year and prove it wrong, that food couldn't possibly make that difference. But actually, after a year, my children's, chronic health issues had completely gone away. And it was so amazing to watch. I had never really considered what food, how food impacts our mood, how it impacts just so much of, how often we're hungry, what we crave. And so I just started, using actually, my own family. We were just, the one big experiment for those first few years. And so then as I started just really getting back to the basics of whole food eating, that's really what I do, not making things complicated. I'm getting the kids in the kitchen. We would make juice at night, fresh juice out of, carrots and celery and spinach and apples, and getting them really involved. And actually, so we moved to Montana about 8 years ago. And ever since then, I've been teaching people here, kids, especially at the YMCA, how to get their hands on real food. And when kids can really have a part in that, it's amazing the things that they will try. And then I've also been teaching, so I've been teaching people either in church kitchens or, in my kitchen for, like I said, about 15 years, just how to take those simple steps of getting back in the kitchen, because we've been, like you and I were talking about earlier, we've really been pushed out of our kitchen. The rules of modern food are, hey, we have all of this packaged food for you ready to go. You can go home, put it in your microwave, and it's ready in, just a couple of minutes. And so it's a social thing now. I think it's just, we consider it normal to eat a lot of packaged foods. And unfortunately, our health is paying the price. So the cost is very high as far as our health goes. And so I think people just need to learn just some basics on how to get back, even if they're just doing, start with one meal. And because it really can be overwhelming and intimidating, because packaged food is so alluring, right?
Yeah, no, it is. And you bring up a lot of good points and a lot of talking points I would love to dive in with you. And what comes to mind right now is a client that I've been working with, her and her daughter, really her daughter, but they had never really been in the kitchen. And so when we were adopting, they were eating healthy in quotes and like just typically still gravitating towards packaged, like convenience, healthy items. So things like deli meat, for example, a lot of the time, or just like raw veggies, which great thing, but in packages still, and or frozen foods. And so just the concepts of like actually cooking their own chicken or buying real vegetables like on the shelves and preparing those has been like a really fun journey, because now they love cooking and they've really gotten into like seeing and experiencing the health benefits and the differences. So let's talk a little bit about the lay of the land of convenience eating, because when we hear packaged foods, I typically used to think like, DiGiorno's pizza in a frozen box, or maybe Kraft macaroni and cheese. However, the processed food industry makes up about, I think it's 60-70% of grocery stores, like are processed packaged foods, and not necessarily in those categories I just mentioned. So we're seeing a lot more paleo, keto, like healthy food options and packaged food. Talk a little bit about that to our audience, and just like how that's evolved over time. You've been doing this a while.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up. Actually, the statistic is that we spend 90% on processed foods, which processed foods are usually packaged foods, and that leaves, about 10% that we spend on fresh fruits and vegetables. And then, what I hear from a lot of people is that they bring them home with good intentions, right, to do something with them, and then they end up going bad in their fridge, and then we end up throwing away 40% of what we buy. And the average family of four actually, they throw away about $1,800 to $2,000 a year, which is, a family vacation, right, in food that is wasted. And so one of the things that I started doing last year was I do a clean out the fridge on Facebook every Thursday night to show people how to clean out their fridge, do what I call a leftover buffet, so that, because everything that we use within a week, and like you were saying, the family who actually, when, instead of buying the frozen food or the packaged food, they decided to buy some fresh food and get back in the kitchen, and they discovered how much they enjoy it. And that's part of rediscovering, I guess, the flavor of real food, because, convenience food is it hijacks our palate, so to speak, because it contains a lot of sugar, salt, and fat, or the lethal, what I call the lethal perfect combination of the three of them. And so we're so used to, if food doesn't have that super, sweet, salty, or rich, creamy, fat flavor, then we're, not liking it, I guess, is the best way to put it. And so one of the ways that we want to do that is, again, just start getting back into the kitchen and using more real food flavor. And then eventually what happens is that, like this family that you were describing, they end up discovering how much not only they enjoy it, but the actual flavor of real food is amazing. It tastes so much better than packaged food, but we don't know that because, again, we've been pushed out of our kitchens. And so this is what we consider food to taste like.
Yeah, there's a book that comes to mind called The Dorito Effect. I don't know if you ever read that.
I have read that. Yes, it's an amazing book. Yeah, The Dorito Effect is exactly what I'm talking about, is that they figured out that perfect combination of sugar, salt, and fat. And you wouldn't believe, you wouldn't think that Doritos, which is a salty food, has sugar in it. But actually, nacho cheese Doritos has 4 different types of sugar in that chip. And that's on purpose.
Yeah, and talking about palate fatigue and why can you be eating out of a Doritos bag, and you look up and you're like, I'm at the end of the bag already, just like the body, it's kind of like a cow gnawing on hay or something like that. It just like our body craves it in a way, but we're just not engaged in that mindfulness experience as well.
Exactly. That's another reason why processed food has driven obesity, is that very thing that you just explained, is that we just mindlessly eat. We eat in a hurry because we've got to get to the next thing. And in doing that, we consume more calories, and often the wrong kind of calories. And so, so that's what is driving, again, all of this, inflammation and, chronic illness and disease. And then we don't feel good mentally. We're like, foggy, or we're irritable, or in children, we see hyperactivity. It manifests in each person different, but that is all a result of basically the chemicals just that are in processed food. And even like you were saying, even when we if we are health conscious and we're looking for those labels that say, carb smart, keto friendly, and if it's at a healthier market, then we automatically think, well, whatever they're selling has got to be, healthy for my body. And we're not really looking at the ingredients, which is one of the first things that I teach people. That's one of the first things that I learned was I didn't understand all of the different things that were in an ingredient list, but I knew if I couldn't pronounce them, that most likely they were a chemical that my body was going to have a hard time using. So that's kind of how I started out. Well, like if I couldn't pronounce a word, or if it had an ingredient list that was extremely long, sometimes they shrink the font to make it look like not as many ingredients. But if it has a whole bunch, most likely many of those are synthetic chemicals, fillers, gums, those type of things, even in the healthy food, and natural flavors, for example, they can use up to 100 different things. And just because it says the word natural doesn't mean that it is. It's basically just derived from something in nature, but it is produced synthetically in a lab.
Right. Petroleum is natural. So
Exactly. And unfortunately, that's not a food for the body.
right.
But unfortunately it is found in a lot of food. And so we've really got to, it takes a little bit of education, but what I teach people is that what I've done for the last 3 decades, I can really, condense that learning time, shorten that learning curve, and where people can, really feel comfortable and confident, because that's really one of the reasons why processed food is so alluring, is because we've lost confidence to be in the kitchen.
Right. And yeah, the confidence I think is there. So for listeners listening to this, they're like, well, but yeah, the convenience factor is still there. And there's just this big like on ramp that it can feel like to get into the kitchen and to just say that. Like, I mean, I'm sure you felt that way looking at that list, looking at your recipes, and then you're like, what do I do? And it doesn't sound like Instagram and like Pinterest, et cetera, was probably as rampant or available at that time for like all the cool things.
Yeah, they weren't. I mean, the only resource that I had at that time was, regular cookbooks, paper cookbooks or the library. But today we have such an opportunity with the advance of technology to use technology really to improve our health. And, there are endless recipes out there that we can use and take advantage of. And so, yeah, I was so frustrated that day. I just took my dry erase marker and I wrote in big capital letters, raw food, across that dry erase board. And I hung it up because I was at a crossroads there, and I had to make a decision. Was I going to really, try this out and get back in the kitchen? And again, I had already made that decision. I was going to do it for a year. So I did. I figured it out. And along the way, it was just an amazing experience to watch the health of my children improve. And, then I became so excited about it that's when I really started researching, and I just became a student of healthy living. And I've taken lots and lots of courses. My own gut crashed in digestive system several years ago, and so I went on a journey to rebuild that. And that's what led me to become a certified fermentationist, because I really learned the importance of building a good, what I call a gut, microbiome, your terrain, environment for that your gut is in. We have to have more good guys than bad guys. That's what I teach people. We really have 2 teams that live in our gut. And if you just think of it as that. And processed food, unfortunately, what it does is it builds that bad bacteria in our gut. And so the bad guys push out the good guys, and they dominate that terrain. And so and then wherever we're genetically weak, that's where we start seeing symptoms manifest. And so if we can build that good guy army by eating foods that are not going to build inflammation, by eating foods that, have probiotics in them, which actually help create a balanced terrain in our gut. All of those things really play a role in how we feel. And we know that when our mood is affected, that affects our feelings, and our feelings affect our action. And so all of these things are interconnected. And that's why taking care of our gut, where 80% of our immune system lives, that's why it's so critical.
You're speaking my language, sister. I love the gut. Well, let's talk about maybe 3 practical ways of helping folks begin to maybe bring awareness to the nutrient density of their diet. I talk a lot about nutrient density with my clients, meaning just like real whole foods that your body's absorbing, digesting, getting a variety of nutrients from, especially for those listeners that may, again, fall in the healthy eating camp already and very familiar with different dietary principles. They may even be eating 5 to 10 foods and just limited to that degree. Talk a little bit about just including more nutrient density into the diet, as well as real foods versus like the awareness over which kind of processed, packaged, or just like non-nutrient dense foods.
Yeah, and Lauren, that's an excellent point, because what people don't understand about packaged food is because, the place where we look on a package or a jar or any, a box, whatever, is we look at the front and where it says, whole grain is the first ingredient, or more protein, or this has half amount of sugar, and we take those facts that are on the front, then we formulate our own opinion about this food, whether it is healthy or not. And unfortunately, the real story, again, like I said before, is on the ingredient list. And the thing about processed food that is so destructive is that they have to take out, unfortunately, to make it shelf stable, to make it taste and look like what we perceive as a real food, they have to take out a lot of the nutrients. So what they do is then they chemically produce, a synthetic vitamin, and they put it back into the food. And so that has convinced us as a society that we're getting enough nutrients, but unfortunately they are really void of nutrients. And so nutrient density, I love talking about that too. What I teach people is you want to get in, my goal is, and that's why eating the rainbow is so much fun, because if you just even focus on that, and when you see a plate or a bowl full of all these different colors, it's just inviting, right? It just looks really good. And the cool thing about the rainbow is that each of those colors is nutrient strong in one vitamin than the other one. And so by combining them all together, for instance, like kale has a super high nutrient density. And what I teach people, a lot of people, especially if they want to lose weight, then they think I have to go on a diet to lose weight. And unfortunately, a diet has a beginning and an end. That's the way we see it. And then we think, okay, we can go back to the way it was. So what I like to help people understand is that if we just count nutrients, and if we try to get in as many nutrients, and that is eating a variety of fruits and vegetables, if you do eat grains, whole grains, legumes, all of that, whatever type of eating that you follow, you have to look at how many nutrients, how many different foods can I get in that I can eat, because it's the nutrients, again, that are either going to, the food either nourishes us and builds us, or our food starves us and destroys us. And so I love just making that it's kind of my daily little challenge. And challenges are really fun because they open up the possibilities of our creativity, right, in anything that we're doing. And so if we challenge ourselves to see, and so that's what I teach people is, if you are eating more foods that actually, one ingredient foods that come from nature, you notice that, a sweet potato doesn't have a food label, right? An avocado doesn't have a food label because it is just the whole food. And I think a lot of the food sensitivities today are driven because of all of the chemicals in the processed food. I think that's one piece of the puzzle. And, along with pesticides and glyphosate and all of these modern day chemicals that they're using in the way that they process and produce today's modern food, unfortunately are creating this, again, unbalance in our body as a whole. And so a lot of times we can't even absorb these really good nutrients. And so we have to, again, that's, one of the things that you do is working to balance out the gut. Mm-hmm. And so that our bodies can, and lower the inflammation. But when we're eating more whole foods, we're getting so many nutrients from them. And so that's what I challenge people to do is see how many nutrients you can fit in any one given meal. And it's actually a fun little thing to do, a contest as to, so to speak.
Yeah, that reminds me, I have a challenge called the 30 plant challenge. And it's just like to see in a given week, if you can get 30 plants, is what they show as being prebiotic, beneficial to a healthy biome and variety. And that could be like a purple carrot and an orange carrot. Those each count as a different plant. But first, I also have people take an inventory, like how many plants are you eating in a day, or vegetables and herbs, etc., those would all count towards that color. And typically it's less than 30. 30 is can feel like a lot for folks. So I love that you bring that up, and also kind of mentioning about abundance mindset. So just like the expansion of diet versus restriction of diet. And Shawndi's really talking about bringing in a lot of different colors and variety again. Talk a little bit about protein. We've talked a lot about plants, but just like how, like there too, like with variety, and what do you see as like, I don't know if there is convenient proteins that you see people gravitating towards more, et cetera, or no protein at all.
Yeah, protein is really important because, it's just like when we're talking about eating nutrient dense, not only do we need, our macronutrients, right, which are protein and carbohydrates and fats, we need those, but, the micronutrients that we get from eating that rainbow, what they do is they're just all, when you put those all together, that makes for one big happy family of getting all of the, so that we can really be nourished. And that's the importance of eating more real food. And so the protein sources are great. Like people, may not, understand that protein is, a lot of vegetables have protein in them. And when you eat a lot of them and you put that together, you're actually getting more protein than you would think. And so I know that, and of course, with the different eating regimens that are out there, some people are, not eating beans or legumes, but that's a really good protein source. Of course, fish, not only like salmon, for instance, not only is it a good protein source, but we're actually getting a lot of omega-3s, which are the fatty acids that are really, really important for our brain health. And so that's why I just teach people, when you do want to get, make sure that you're getting a good source of protein. We don't want to be, fried foods, fried meats are really hard for the body to digest. And so although they are a source of protein, again, I really try to teach people to look at how they're preparing whatever source of protein that they, is working well in their body, then what's the best way we can prepare that? For instance, for a lot of people don't eat beans, not because they're allergic to them, but they don't eat them because they cause a lot of gas and bloating. And so I help people look at that. Well, back in the day, what I call, our heritage, the way food used to be produced and fixed, cooked, in the kitchen, how we would prepare it, they would automatically soak beans and then they would sprout them. And for what that does is that helps to neutralize a lot of the phytic acid anti-nutrients that are in that particular food. They also did that with grains. And what happens is when you sprout a food, it increases the absorption ability of magnesium, zinc, vitamin B6, which is a protein, iron. And we don't, again, that's not something that's talked about today. It also increases the protein availability in that. So whatever protein's available in that grain or bean or, legume, it just increases it exponentially. And it also breaks down gluten. When you soak and sprout, it breaks that down. And so if you look at today's processed food and how much we've gotten away from just these basic things. And what I love to tell people is that it takes very little hands-on time to do this. In other words, you can put a cup of beans in a bowl, fill it up with filtered water, throw a kitchen towel over it. That takes a couple of minutes, literally. And then you go to bed or you go about your day, whether you're doing that in the morning or in the evening. And then when you're sprouting as well, you're rinsing them in the morning sometime and in the evening sometime. It's not any specific time. It's super low on hands-on time. And yet what you get as a result is this food that your body can use, get more of the nutrients out of, and you have less symptoms by doing this as well. So it's just a win-win. But again, back to your question, getting a really good source of protein. I teach people that we need to, if you're eating meat, then you need to make sure that meat is coming from an animal that was raised like animals are meant to be raised, and not on not fed in a feeding lot where they are bulking them up so that they can get to slaughter quicker. And so they're giving them hormones to build them up or to produce more milk, whatever type of animal they are. And unfortunately, the animals get sick, so they fill them full of antibiotics. And all of that is going into our own bodies. So we really need to just look at the source of where we're getting all of our protein and making sure that we're able to use it, produce it, prepare it in a way that is going to be best for our body.
I love that you mentioned that. Yeah, it's all about quality, really, of our food quality. So, Shawndi, thank you so much. We've talked about color, we've talked about variety and abundance with our nutrient density, properly preparing our foods, and then sourcing our foods. I think those are all little dial turners that can help folks bring up their nutrient density a huge notch. Shawndi, where can people find out more about you and your work? And also, I know you do Facebook Lives quite a bit.
I do. So my website is showmehealthyliving.com. And on the website, I have a membership site where I have a library of hundreds of recipes that are just, you can make in the kitchen in 30 minutes or less. And that is what I want people to know, that doesn't have to take a lot of time. And so I have tested and tried and just put these recipes in there that not only nourish, but they have amazing flavor, and you can make them in 30 minutes or less. So you can check it out there on my website at showmehealthyliving.com. On Facebook, I also have a Facebook group, which is Show Me Healthy Living. My private Facebook group is Sweet Life Without Sugar, and you can ask to join that. And every Thursday night I do a clean out the fridge at 6 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, and I show you what I do with everything in my fridge so that I have zero waste and great taste. And then also you can find me this Friday. I'm going to be starting a Spring Clean Your Life Facebook challenge. And so that will also be on Facebook. And we're going to cover mindset, your gut, your habits, and your home, and over the month of May, and what you can do to just take some really simple things. Because, when habits become automatic, like brushing our teeth, then that's what cooking is. Cooking is self-care. And when those things become automatic, then they're just part of our day, and they're no longer overwhelming. So that's what I do, is I just walk you through one step at a time so that you can feel your best and live free of chronic illness and disease.
Oh, thank you, Shawndi. I love that you're doing this work in the world. So we'll definitely be keeping up. I'm going to be tuning in too.
Well, thanks so much, Lauren.
For sure.
You do. And again, it's so great to partner with wonderful, amazing practitioners like you, who are really, it's your passion to help people to, be able to experience more life, because that's what we want for everyone. So thank you for inviting me to be a part of this today.
Yeah, happy to be in it with you, sister.